Let's talk a little bit about that Cori Bush, Wesley Bell race. This is an interesting one. I know that you had your eyes on this, Chris, coming into tonight.
Well, it's interesting because Cori Bush won that seat. She was primaried by Wesley Bell. And Cori Bush was in a class of sort of Justice Democrats that were, there was Ilhan Omar and there was AOC and Rashida Tlaib. There was also Jamal Bowman in New York. And after Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman lost their primaries to sort of more centrist candidates, basically, with a fair amount of outside money, some of which ASPAC related, some of which not. There was a little bit of like, oh, this moment of sort of leftist insurgent primary challengers is over. I think that obituary was very premature, as we've seen, right. But it is very interesting that in this year in which there has been a lot of success by left insurgent candidates, that's a place where there was a rematch. It was the same two candidates in the same sort of axes of disagreement, and clearly the incumbent won. The other thing I'd say, which relates to what Lawrence is saying, is in the context of all this, in all the races that are going to happen, the incumbent's going to win 95% of the time, or 92% of the time, or maybe 89%.
Like when it's somebody who used to hold the seat and has a lot of name recognition against somebody who's currently holding the seat, the incumbency, I think it's a little.
Agree.
But so I
he beat her. I mean, look, he clearly has a better connection to that district. All I'm saying is what ends up happening is because of how novel, right? The sort of man bites dog aspect of news is when a challenger beats an incumbent, right? Yeah. When an incumbent loses, it's news because most of what happens in politics here in the U.S. and in democratic politics in most places is that incumbents coast to victory.
But a lot of that has to do with how the system is built.
Totally, yeah.
The system is built for incumbency.
Yeah.
And if I'm a member, this is getting into the redistricting issue. Who draws the line?
Totally.
Well, the state legislature, or who has an influence over the state legislature? The person who wants the lines drawn. So it's that whole kind of soup. But it's interesting to me, to Lawrence's point, both your points actually, that you have all of this, the establishment's not listening to me. The establishment doesn't care. They're not paying attention. And yet I'm just going to put the establishment incumbent back in office. And a lot of that has to do with what they've done versus what they've not done. How have you offended me as a voter? How much have you paid attention to me? The constituent services aspect of this is always very, very important, particularly when you get into congressional offices and how they deliver.
There is an amazing Barack Obama interview that he recently did around the opening of the library, and he talked about how he hired the ex-chief of staff, Tom Daschle, a guy named Pete Rouse, legendary, who was, seen as the 101st senator. And he said his first meeting with Pete Rouse is Pete Rouse comes in and he says, he's got this brain trust in front of him. And he goes to the young senator, the best thing you could do is answer your mail. Answer your mail. Every letter that comes in gets a response. And that was one of the first things they said about doing was setting up the office of new Illinois Senator Barack Obama, phenom to the world, the guy that gave the speech that when you wrote to the senator because you were mad about an intersection near you in Joliet, Illinois, that you got a response from the senator.
That's it.
I remember in the Stone Ages, when I was in college taking political science classes, literally like before the invention of the pencil, like what you learned on day one is that in general, in every state, in every party, on every part of the ideological number line, if you ask people if they like Congress, the answer is no, they hate Congress. And do you like your member of Congress? Yes, I do. Everybody likes their own. Everybody likes the inchoate other that is making life hard for them. That's why anybody labeled the establishment is almost by definition the enemy, whether or not they've done anything. But it doesn't necessarily mean that people want to turn out their own piece of the establishment, who is the person they know, who they have voted for, and who may have answered their mail.
The establishment, I get what people mean by it, but if you really analyze what it is, it's really a speaking style. That's really what it is. I mean, it's impossible for Bernie Sanders to be more a part of the establishment. He's a committee chairman. I mean, when they're in the minority, he's called the ranking member. But he's been the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. He has collaborated with Chuck Schumer on every single thing Chuck Schumer has done. He's voted with Chuck Schumer on everything. There's never been. Remember the big fight on the Senate floor between Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders, where they really slugged it out over? No, it never happened once. Not once. Those two people agree about 99% of the time. Tactically, they might have disagreements inside about what we should go for next and all that sort of thing. But Bernie Sanders has a way of sounding like he's not from inside the building. And that is the key to that perception of establishment. And Chuck Schumer is so much a creature of the building, and he can't pretend otherwise, that he is from that building.
Can I add one addendum to that, which I basically agree with? I do think the super PAC role here is worth shining a light on. I mean, there really were $60 million dropped on Abdul El Sayed's head from money from out of, like, there was nothing on the other side of that, right? So there is a pool of money that has been marshaled in these races, often on behalf of what's been coded as the establishment candidate, whether that's a fair establishment or not. And I agree with you. That super PAC money is a bit orthogonal to the actual, like, tactical and ideological debates. They don't line up. They have been sort of collapsed into the same. But when we're talking about the Michigan Senate race and this establishment, there really was one candidate who had $60 million.
$60 million of TV ads.
Of TV ad super PAC money that was dropped against him. Where it wasn't for the other candidate. Like, that is just the fact. And that's been true in a lot of these races where it has been the case that outside money, sometimes it's crypto money, sometimes it's AI money, sometimes it's sort of party donor money, and in many places it's APAC associated money has been directed at one person. Whether that's like the establishment or not, I don't really think that really makes sense because they've all been collapsed together. But that is one vector where we really have seen a difference.